Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Flourish FM, a podcast for the good life. Our guest today is Dr. Satchin Panda. Satchin is a world-leading expert in circadian rhythm research. He's an associate professor at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, a Pew Scholar, and a recipient of the Dana Foundation Award in Brain and Immune System Imaging. He's the author of 2 best-selling books, The Circadian Code and The Circadian Diabetes Code, and The Circadian Code in particular is the focus of our conversation today. Nick, what did you enjoy most about our conversation with Satchin?
I think it's accessible at different levels. So you and I came in, I think, through some of our training and coaching work, knowing we thought a decent amount about circadian rhythm, circadian clock, chronotypes. He was able to clarify language. He was able to distinguish a little bit for people that are already coming in with some baseline knowledge. But I think he also just put things very concretely and simply for somebody who's never heard the term circadian rhythm, the circadian clock. And so I found it to be nuanced and insightful, but also very accessible for somebody that's new to the term. And he was a great communicator that way. So really enjoyable conversation.
Absolutely. Totally agree. We hope you enjoy this as much as we did. This is Understanding the Impact of Biological Rhythms on Flourishing with Dr. Satchin Panda. Satchin, welcome. It's an honor to meet you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're really excited to dig into your work on circadian rhythms in particular. And you are a world-leading expert in circadian rhythm research. So let's start off with the most basic question. What are circadian rhythms or our circadian clocks? And how can living in alignment or misalignment with these impact our health and well-being?
Yeah, circadian rhythms literally means close to 24 hours rhythms. So the most obvious rhythm that we experience is the sleep-wake cycle, because we are programmed to go to bed around the same time and be in bed and get our restful sleep. So similarly, there are rhythms of this daily timetable of when our brain should rest and wake up, when every gene, every hormone, every brain chemical in our body and mind should turn on and off at a specific time of the day. And by turning on and off at a specific time of the day, these circadian rhythms boost our immune system so that we can fight against infection, boost our metabolism so that we are resilient against diabetes, obesity, and all these metabolic diseases, including cancer. They improve our mental health so that we are resilient against depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, all types of health issues with brain health. And also, more importantly, they help us repair our body, starting from our brain to even broken bones and ligaments and joints, so that we live a very healthy and active life. So in that way, circadian rhythms really, truly the blueprints of how to live our life in a healthy state, in a very fulfilling way.
Perfect. Thank you. And your research has shown that our genes, molecules, and cells keep our body on the same circadian clock. So these impact us on a biological level. So how exactly does our biology keep us on the same circadian clock each day of the week, each day of the year?
Yeah, so we are actually designed to be following these daily rhythms every single day. For example, if you ever go camping for several days, you will experience that no matter how little you walk during the day or how much you walked, you almost fall asleep around the same time, plus or minus 15 minutes to 30 minutes. So that says that we are designed to be very consistent from day to day in our daily habit, whether it's sleep, whether it's when you feel hungry, or whether we should be active. And being on this pre-designed timetable actually keeps us healthy and resilient. And what we have learned so far over the last 40, 50 years is these circadian rhythms are regulated by what is called circadian clocks or timing cues. And these, just like we have DNA in almost all of our cells, similarly, these circadian clocks are programmed by our own DNA. So that means almost every single cell in our body and mind, every neuron has circadian clock. And these clocks are synchronized with each other. So for example, you might now envision that in the morning, for example, if you had long overnight fast, then you will feel hungry. So that means your brain center that creates the sense of hunger. It sensed that your stomach is empty or you're running on a low energy. So it triggers that, the brain clock triggers that you should be looking for food. And then once you start eating, your stomach clock and all the pancreatic clock, they also know that it's time to eat. So they produce the right enzymes to digest your food, and pancreas also produces insulin so that the digested carbohydrate is absorbed correctly. And then the energy flows into your brain and you feel more energetic, more active. So all of these things that we take for granted are actually pre-programmed in a very timely fashion by all the circadian clocks that are present in almost every part of our body. So then the question is, okay, so why should we care about it? And for the last 200,000 years, we have been living with we are the only species that actually controls fire, and that's the defining feature of our species. Because once we control fire, we could light up the evening and stay awake a little bit into the night. And in that way, you can say that breaking our circadian rhythm by staying awake late into the night was the cradle of modern civilization. Because the fireside chat that our ancestors did, that's where philosophy, performing arts, singing, dancing, even politics, all of this started. And staying awake late into the night and navigating this through the stars actually helped our explorers stay awake throughout the night and go to new places. So breaking our circadian clock to some extent is actually necessary to create wealth and flourish to some extent. But at the same time, by doing it randomly, erratically over a long period of time, desynchronizes the clocks in our body and brain, so that you may be feeling hungry at the wrong time when your stomach is not ready to digest food. Or you may be feeling alert in the middle of the night when your body and muscle, everything else is telling you should be falling asleep. So when our clocks are desynchronized for many, many days, then that can increase the risk for almost every type of disease. Few days of breaking the clock might be some discomfort, but doing it over weeks, months, or years can lead to many chronic diseases, starting from diabetes, obesity, cancer, and even dementia.
So for our listeners, please correct me if this is an oversimplification, but something like jet lag, that's quite literally being off rhythm in many ways. Is that accurate?
Yeah, jet lag is a very clear example of what might happen to you when your circadian rhythms are disrupted.
Yeah.
And the point is, suppose your colleague might have flown in from London, and you might have stayed awake the previous night till 3 o'clock finishing an assignment. So your circadian disruption is almost same as the person who flew in from London.
Right.
So that means we don't have to actually go through jet travel to experience circadian disruption. Even shift work or shift work-like lifestyle, where you stay awake for at least 2 hours during your habitual sleep time. Suppose you go to bed at midnight and wake up at 7 or 8. If you stayed awake for until 2 or 3 in the morning, and engaged in some work. It's not lying in the bed with your eyes closed, you cannot fall asleep. But being engaged in a work under light actually disrupts your circadian rhythm.
Right. So, those are a couple good examples. I think a lot of people can relate to having that terrible night of sleep and just feeling off all day, or maybe multiple days, or jet lag. And so we can, I think, appreciate how that shows up, physically, and then the implications emotionally, and all sorts of different issues that come with it. So then the question becomes, what should we be doing, right? What is our rhythm? And so we subsequently have to ask, like, how do I identify? Is there a lot of variance? And eventually I kind of want to get into chronotypes and the distinction. But is there a lot of variance in circadian rhythms and circadian clocks? Or are most human beings really kind of in that tighter window of, say, like, dawn to dusk?
Yeah, so most humans are within that tight window because our endogenous, our internal circadian clock is not exactly 24 hours. It's 24 hours, 15 minutes, and some people might be 24 hours, 30 minutes. The reason why is, if you look carefully outside the equator, the sunrise to sunrise is not exactly 24 hours because of the tilt of our planet and then rotation around the elliptical path. What happens is as the summer goes to winter and winter goes to fall, etc. So then what happens is our day length shrinks, our day length expands. So we are designed to readjust our circadian clock slightly every single day. So that's why it's not exactly 24 hours or 20. So then the question is, well, we have a clock, but it's also very flexible, or what we call plastic. So that means it's designed for us to adapt to long winter nights or very long summer day. So having that in mind, then the question is, it doesn't matter whether our internal clock is 24, 24 and a half or 24:15. What matters is how sensitive we are to these cues that entrain us. So for example, light that entrains us to different season. Some may be more sensitive to light, some may be less sensitive to light. Similarly, although circadian clock regulates sleep, sleep has its own program. So then if we, for example, if we consume a lot of caffeine, then that can delay our sleep. And when your sleep is delayed, we're not lying in bed in dark room. We are actually working or doing something under light. And that light then resets our circadian clock. So you can see there are many things other than our circadian clock that actually affects when we habitually go to bed or when we typically wake up in the morning. So that's why most of us have the same circadian clock, a very similar circadian clock, but our sensitivity to light, our stress level, caffeine level, and whether we have a job that requires us to stay awake or wake up early in the morning to beat the traffic, all of these things affect us in a way that after a while we feel like, maybe, every day if you are waking up at 6 o'clock to beat the traffic, then you feel like you have become a morning person, but actually you may be designed to sleep until 8 o'clock. And then, so that's why it's very difficult to say that we are designed to be different people, but it's our habits or work pressure that actually makes us ignore our circadian rhythm or stick to a schedule. And we believe that that's our internal program.
I was curious about that, and we wanted to ask about it eventually because I've heard different perspectives and opinions on, like, can you change your rhythm? Can you change your chronotype? And from different, what I assume to be reputable sources. And so I've been interested to get your perspective. And I think some of the examples you see is, I'm going to make a generalization here, but you tend to have sort of kind of the, sleeping in, night owl kind of culture among teenagers. Seems to be as we age, and please tell me if this is a myth, but these are the things I'm curious about.
Yeah, so this is interesting because we see that everywhere. Teenagers, I think what happens is they're more sensitive to light and they're also more excited about stuff happening. So then another thing that is also happening in our culture is we put a lot of stuff on the teens. We ask them to do sports practice in the evening and then do something else. And then by the time they get home is 9 or something, they have to still catch up on homework. So we force them, our system forces them to be active until midnight. And that's one reason why teenagers are typically what we call delayed chronotype, you can say, but I don't want to use the word chronotype because you feel like you are genetically programmed, which is not true. The reason why I bring that up is there are also researchers who have gone back to population which have very limited or no access to electric lighting. And in those communities, the teenagers and the older adults, they all go to bed around the same time, between 9 and 10. And you don't see the teenagers actually delaying their sleep time because they have a underlying program. You see that mostly in modern societies. And even if you take teenagers and then say, okay, this is summer vacation, you have nothing else to do and you are isolated in an island and you have plenty to eat. And what will happen to teenagers? They will actually go to sleep around 9 or 10. And they will wake up. Of course, they will sleep for a very long time to catch up on their sleep debt. But this is something that those experiments have also been done. You take teenagers and put them in completely relaxing environment. So I guess part of it is how we designed our modern world actually forces means right now, if you look at many of the high schools in the US, and also many in Europe, the deadline to submit your homework is midnight. Because people can submit everything digitally, so it doesn't matter. And then most of the digital systems, by default, the end of the day is midnight.
Yeah, John and I both come from schools, by the way. Like that's not even to mention here in the States the start times, and all the things that come with it. But yeah, you can see that in a very lived way with teenagers, the rhythm of the day, especially.
Yeah. And then you asked another question, can you permanently, or at least on a long-term basis, can you change? Yes, you can change. And one example is, teenagers, they change it to such an extent that after a while, they just don't feel like they can go to bed at 10 o'clock. They feel like I'm a lousy, lazy person if I go to bed at 10. But conversely, you'll also see people who do shift work. They will be doing night shift work all lifelong. And then one day they retire, come back home, and all of a sudden they reset. They wake up in the morning and they have the regular life. So that also happens. And then there are people who, with the globalization of service industry, all your tech supports are in a different country. And if you look at the people who work in call centers, they also live in a very different time zones. And unfortunately, what happens is their work is not 7 days a week. So 4 days or 5 days, they work in one time zone. And then for 3 days, they come back to their own time zone. And that is equivalent to flying to a different country every single week. And it has a heavy toll on their mental health and physical health.
Yeah. So on shift work, night shift work. So can we just clarify the meaning of that? Because as I understand it, the World Health Organization have stated that shift work is a problem for long-term health, but it's defined much more broadly than I thought. Isn't it defined as anyone who chooses or has to stay up for 2 hours or more between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m.?
Yeah, so that's International Labour Organization. It compiles shift work definition from many European countries, and some European countries say 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Some say 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. But the bottom line is, so that's why I say, if you stay awake for 2 or more hours and are engaged in some kind of work, so that can be caregiving. So if you have an older parent and somebody you are caring for, or even a young baby, and you are doing it for at least 50 days in a year. So that means once a week, if you do that, then that also has heavy toll on you, on your mental health or physical health. So in that way, I would say almost all of us are shift workers because these days, it's very hard to see. You can we all can reflect on our own lives and ask ourselves, what happened the day we stayed awake for extra 3 hours, whether it's in a pub or whether it's in attending a wedding ceremony or something else. And then, of course, that evening was very enjoyable, but then the next day you feel crappy, and then it might linger even a couple more days to see how your bowel movement and how alertness and energy level in the morning, all of them take 2 or 3 days to come back to normal. So that's what it means. And what happens is when it happens on a regular basis, then this is where World Health Organization has gone back to reviewing the health records of, say, firefighters, nurses, painters, and bakers. So there are certain professions, because on these professions there are more data available. It's not that they looked at all the professions and they came up with something. And they found that the risk for certain types of cancer in these individuals is pretty high, much higher than the general population. So that's why IARC, which is a subcommittee of World Health Organization, has categorized certain type of shift works as potential carcinogen. It's same as cancer-causing chemicals. So that's as bad as that. But unfortunately, this has not trickled down to the community, because we are always thinking, well, firefighters, yes, we need them. But at the same time, can we improve their health to an extent that they're more resilient? And can we schedule their routine in a way that they can actually still work and improve the chance of not getting cancer? And this is where a lot of policy issues and other things come into play. For example, if you see within the US, there are nearly 250,000 full-time firefighters. So there are voluntary firefighters and then full-time firefighters. There are nearly 750,000 volunteer firefighters, 250,000 full-time. But their schedule is very different. For example, in San Diego, the schedule is 8 a.m. to 8 a.m., 24 hours on, 24 hours off. It happens 4 cycles, and then they take 2 days off. Whereas in certain cities, it's 72 hours on and 72 hours off. And in some cities, it is 48 hours on, 48 hours off. And in some cities, even though it is 24 hours, some cities start at 6 p.m. to 6 p.m., whereas San Diego starts 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. So obviously, there is no scientific basis to justify all these variations. But at the same time, we don't have much studies on which shift work or what schedule will actually keep you healthy. So there's a lot of unmet need in this area of how to manage shift work. Even within the same hospital, in the same university health system, there might be one department that requires the residents to come 18 hours, another department will require you to come for 16 hours, and the shift might start. Even in the med school, they haven't figured out how to optimize shift work for their own doctors.
Yeah, right. So that might be the place where it's most egregious, in fact, which is an irony. Yeah, which is an irony.
Yeah, definitely. Can we just clarify? Because that's a staggering fact that you pointed to, the broader definition. So did you say it was 10 p.m. or 9 p.m.? You said 50 nights a year if you're active, so working, for example, but it could also be if you're socializing.
Yeah, it can be socializing.
Or more hours between 10, was it between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. or was it between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m.?
Yeah, so those definitions are different for different countries in the International Labour Organization. So that's why what I say is, if you stay awake for 2 or more hours during your habitual sleep time, right? So for example, if you're a 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. person, and then if you stayed awake till 1 a.m., then that would be disruptive. Whereas if you are going from 1 a.m. till 9 a.m. every day, single day, your definition will be different, because you have to stay awake until 3 a.m. So I tend to use the habitual sleep time. And again, it becomes difficult because some people don't have a habitual sleep time. This is if you don't have a habitual sleep time, then you are a shift worker.
Hi, everyone. This is just a quick break to thank one of our sponsors, the Shipley School. We're extremely grateful to be supported by our friends at the Shipley School, an institution that has served as a trailblazer of well-being education for decades. Educating to Flourish is an approach to educational practice that promotes a focus on actualizing human potential. While this means continuing to prioritize the development of traditionally academic competencies, it also recognizes that these competencies are a small part of what leads human beings to live good, impactful lives. Using data-driven methods backed by various scientific fields such as neuroscience, educational psychology, behavioral economics, positive psychology, and more, the goal of Shipley's approach is to cultivate flourishing, the synergistic combination of well-being and optimal performance. Shipley aims to do so for all constituencies that make up the entire Shipley community. For more information about the Shipley School and Education for Flourishing, visit shipleyschool.org or contact Dr. Sharon Russell, Director of Student Support and Wellbeing. Thank you.
Hi friends, Nick here with just a brief interlude to share with you an update on one of our newest partnerships with the Anti-Fragile Academy. Throughout John and I's conversations with many, if not most, of our guests, one thing has been made really clear. In order for people to flourish, thrive, experience the good life, they need to develop the capacity to not only navigate and endure, but ideally grow from the bad, grow from unpleasant experiences. That's why we're thrilled to be partnering with our newest sponsor, the Anti-Fragile Academy, an organization that I co-founded with Dr. Adam Wright, Director of Mental Performance for the Washington Nationals. At the Anti-Fragile Academy, we work with adolescent athletes, executives, and educators to help them understand some of the science, not just of optimal performance, but of well-being and anti-fragility. The ability not only to endure and bounce back from unpleasantness, but to actually come back stronger, to grow from it. Between Adam and I, we've worked with Fortune 100 companies, Inc. 300 executives, Division I programs, and elite professional athletes and Olympians from all over the world. To find out more about how you can leverage anti-fragility training, check out our website at theantifragileacademy.com. That's part of what I'm curious about, right? Is when we, like, if we can try to concretize circadian disruption, and maybe it's all circadian disruption, but I'm wondering, like, are there clear breaking points where you just see a lot of the negative effects compound or amplify? Because I hear, like, okay, once a week, right? Ideally, we are not having once a week where we're disrupting our circadian rhythm, but I also don't know how realistic that is for most folks for a variety of the reasons you've outlined, right?
Yeah.
So then what does that look like? You know, okay, if we get off rhythm one day a week versus, you know, I'm sleeping poorly and up in the middle of the night 3-4 times a week, versus I'm a shift worker that's working, like you said, or a firefighter 8 to 8, 3 days in a row, right? What are the kind of escalating effects there?
Yeah, so this is where we got to pay a little bit more attention to what are the aspects of circadian rhythm. We always get more discussion around sleep-wake cycle because this is something everybody does. We can relate to it, and this is a very quiet time that we all relate to. But at the same time, just like our brain has a clock that makes us sleep and wake up, the rest of our body also has metabolic rhythm. So that means we're supposed to eat at certain time and then stop eating at some time so that we can repair, reset, rejuvenate our body clock. So this is where when you eat and when you stop eating has a huge impact on circadian rhythm. So, and over the last 20 plus years, the first 10 years or so, I worked on light and how light resets our clock. And what we figured out is, yes, light is the biggest agent that can synchronize our brain clock, and then the brain clock sends that information to the rest of the body. But then around 2009, 2010, we also stumbled on the big discovery. I didn't know it was a big discovery that when we eat has a profound impact on all the body clocks and also most part of our brain, except for a tiny part of the base of the brain called hypothalamus, and specifically suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's a mouthful, but it's essentially the master clock in our brain. Except for those 20,000 or 40,000 neurons, almost the rest of the body actually follows when we eat and when we stop eating. So, for example, suppose say you start eating at 9 a.m. in the morning, and that's when all the body clock got the signal that, okay, so your food timing is 9 a.m. It's almost like flipping this light switch on in the morning when you wake up and turn on the light and your brain gets alert and then your brain circadian clock is getting reset. Similarly, the first bite of the day synchronizes all the body clock. And then it starts counting time. And then after your last bite, suppose say you started at 9 a.m. and you stopped at say 6 p.m. Of course, many of us don't stop at 6 p.m. Suppose say you stop at 6 p.m. Then what happens is, although your mouth stopped eating at 6 p.m., your stomach is still digesting that food for another 5 or so hours. So that means at 11, your stomach is going to go to sleep. Or that's when it's going to repair the gut lining, and then many nighttime repair and rejuvenation activities will start. So now, suppose that this is your schedule, 9 a.m., irrespective of what happens, you try to eat around 9 or 10 in the morning, and then you try to finish all your food. Water is permitted outside, but food, alcohol, and all these sugar-containing beverages, everything stops at 6 p.m. So if you have that kind of routine, and then your sleep is disturbed, maybe one day you are going to bed at 12 in midnight, one day at 10 p.m., one day at 1 a.m., you may still reap many of the benefits of having a healthy circadian clock, because most of your clocks are tracking your food timing. So that's why we did a study on firefighters who are still on this 24 hours on and then 24 hours off. And we know that firefighters, when they're 24 hours off, it's a stressful job. So they indulge, so they go out, hang out with friends, and have late night food. But we asked them, can you self-select a 10-hour sitting window? We are not forcing them to pick any specific 10 hours. Yes, okay, just self-select a 10 hours that you feel like you can stick to it both on your work day and off days. And what we figured out was most people were choosing somewhere to start breakfast somewhere between 7:30 and 9:30. Some people started at 7:30, some people 9:30, one or two at 10 o'clock, and then they would count 10 hours and stop. And they could do it for, on an average, 5 to 6 days a week. They still went outside that window, but not too far for 1 or 2 days. And we found that they reported that on the off days, they could sleep much better. On the work day, after the call, when they come back to the station, they can fall asleep right away. And the mental health improved. So this study was done during COVID. There were the frontline workers and those who maintain this, what we call time-restricted eating, and we'll get to talk about that more. They were more resilient in the sense their mental health improved. They were not too depressed, because many firefighters, of course, have mental health issues because of the type of the work they do and all the stress. Mm-hmm. And also their risk for diabetes, high blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease actually reduced within 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. So that told us that even though you have a very disrupted sleep-wake cycle and stress and activity, sticking to at least one rhythm, that is eating fasting rhythm, still gives you a good amount of resilience to reduce your risk for all the adverse effect of erratic sleeping pattern or working like a shift worker.
Mm-hmm. What a useful nuance, because you're exactly right. All the publicity, and when we bring it up, research we talk about or use in coaching or consulting, it's all around sleep-wake cycle.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that we always relate to. So that's why this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. And since we see the tip and we don't see what is under the water, we don't talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very useful.
So thank you so much for that, Satchin. This is fascinating. So let's go into this a bit further. So one thing we could perhaps take from this, what this seems to imply, is something that's often said, which is that with intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, it's good to stop eating quite early in the evening, because, like you say, it takes around 5 hours for the stomach to completely digest food, so you can sleep better. Is that an implication of your research, or does the time not matter in terms of how long before you go to bed?
Yeah, so there are both biological reason and social reason. Right. Biological reason, you clearly mentioned that, okay, so when we eat food, There is a lot of digestion going on and absorption of nutrition. All of these things have to happen within 4 or 5 hours. So a lot of blood circulation goes towards our core or our stomach to absorb that nutrition. So our core body temperature actually goes up. And there is a term called postprandial thermogenesis. So that means our body actually produces heat during this process. And as we all know, our body needs to cool down for us to go to sleep. So that's why it's better to finish eating at least 3 hours before your habitual bedtime. And another thing is, if your stomach is relatively empty, then the repair process can start. And within, say, 1 to 2 hours of going to bed, our habitual bedtime bed, then brain produces growth hormone that's required for repairing the gut lining and many other parts of our body. So that's why if you stop eating minimum 3 hours before bedtime, then you're kind of aligning your growth hormones peak with an empty stomach or with a body that's ready for repair. So that's the biological region. The social region is, if you look at what time of the day people eat what type of food, then it's pretty obvious that all the comfort food, whether it's wine, beer, liquor, and ice cream, all of this begin after 6 p.m., right? And it peaks around 8 or 9. So there is a social region. If you stop eating, say, before 6 or as early as possible, then your risk for alcohol and sweet stuff, actually consuming those, that reduces. And in fact, we saw that objectively in the firefighter study, and we saw there was a statistically significant drop in alcohol consumption among firefighters on their off days. Of course, on the work day, they're not drinking, but on the off days. And that was very surprising and pleasing for the firefighter community, because the many people who are in law enforcement or firefighting, since it's a stressful job, they get into alcohol as a relief, and there are active programs. Government and all these unions, they're actually spending thousands and millions of dollars for alcohol management. And it was kind of gratifying to see, just by timing, just by advancing their dinner time, they could reduce significantly alcohol intake. So these are some of the social region and then biological reasons why finishing early dinner is a good idea.
Great. Thank you very much. I mean, a recurring kind of tension within this conversation so far is, if we want to promote human flourishing, there seems to be a compromise we're having to make between prioritizing our physical health and, by implication, also our mental health and so on, by, for example, sleeping exactly the same times or as close as possible every single evening and waking up same time every day, and maybe skipping dinner or eating dinner much earlier and so on. And then social health. We've had various episodes where guests have discussed this new concept with us, relatively new concept of social health and how important that is for our well-being. I mean, that's maybe not something you work on directly with your research, but do you have any views on how we manage that balance between living a life where we are extreme, as rigorous as we can be with our consistent sleep times and our consistent eating times?
Yeah, blueprint.
Yeah, exactly. Without avoiding maybe
to the extreme.
Johnson.
Yeah,
I think he finishes his last meal at 11 a.m. Right? Because I mean, another point we can take from this is that, okay, if you're staying up 2 hours later than usual one evening a week, that's potentially significantly problematic for your health as well, right? So, what's your view, out of interest, on how we balance these things?
I mean, we are social animals, and as I mentioned, we have ingrained in almost in our DNA that we have to socialize. The fireside chat is still there with us, right? If we are not sitting near the fire, of course, we are sitting next to the television and then doing something. Whether it's a physical social engagement or digital social engagement, we tend to do that in the evening. That's also another part of that is, during the daytime we actually work. We are working for getting food on the table, or this is your job. And then unfortunately most people actually don't like what they do because they're doing it to make money. So what happens is after work is our personal freedom time. And this is when everybody needs to enjoy that personal freedom time with better quality social interaction. And that interaction can be physical, in person, or digital. It doesn't much matter, because right now, if we look at the modern society, it's very different, because if you dial back maybe 100 years, when more than 50% of households were agrarian, then 3 generations were living in the same household, and it was pretty natural and easy to socialize with a bunch of people in the same household. There are maybe 10 or 15 people living. Whereas now, most of the things is digital. Like, for example, there is a surprising statistics that nearly 40+% people who live in Washington, D.C. area actually live alone. In this.
Wow, so many.
And so then the question is, how do they socialize? Do they have to go to socialize in a pub or restaurant every single day? Or are there alternate modes to socializing? And this is where I think we have to think about how to socialize. For example, in many evenings, I pick up the phone because my mom lives in India. Many of my relatives are in India. Some are other parts of the US. So that's the time when I get in touch with other people. And sometimes even at work or somewhere else, if we socialize, then of course, once a week or once or twice a week, you can still eat a little bit outside your window, but still you can socialize. You can socialize without food. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Or alcohol.
Alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can still have a glass of sparkling water with a lime in it, and people will think you're drinking gin and tonic, and that's okay.
You make such an important point, and the World Happiness Report recently got released, and this was basically what they were highlighting. A lot of interesting things about just the difference it makes to have one day a week where you have a meal with somebody else, which just isn't all that common anymore necessarily, to your point, because a lot of people live alone, depending on the location, around the world and the culture and those sorts of things. But I think it sounds like, again, you could take this very easily in an extreme direction to where, like, I've got to be home at this time. I've got to be to bed at this time. I've got to stay on rhythm. I've got to, and there's very good reasons for that, because as we've anchored it, we all know what it feels like to be jet lagged or maybe have a hangover or terrible night's sleep or whatever it might be. But there are very, very real trade-offs here in terms of overall kind of quality of life.
Yeah. So another thing about socializing, we also have to think, like, we don't have to socialize in the evening only.
Sure.
So that's why I say the weekends are great time for socializing, and you can socialize in a park. You can go for a walk. For example, during COVID and after COVID, there was a lot of reports that how people were depressed or mental health issues skyrocketing, and people brought up various hypotheses, although it was difficult to prove anything. And I have my own hypothesis. My hypothesis was most people are stuck indoor, and we don't get enough daylight during daytime. Even I had done experiment on myself. I wear a light sensor on my wrist and also on my glasses sometimes. And then what I figured out that even living in San Diego, I don't get enough light. The only time I was getting daylight or more than, say, 2,000-3,000 lux of light was when I was driving from home to work or work to home. And we know that it's a general knowledge that people living in northern latitude, say in Alaska, Canada, or Nordic countries in winter, they don't get enough light and they get depressed. And light therapy actually helps a lot of them. So nowadays, I think when we hear about somebody who is depressed or is going through mental health issues, I think the best thing we can do is go for a walk on a weekend afternoon in a park or somewhere, because you get light, you give social company, and you actually uplift the other person, both by social interaction and by exposure to light, and also a little bit of exercise, and 3 in 1.
Yeah.
Well, and time in nature as well. You go 4 and more with the time in nature.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, if it could be an awe-inspiring walk as well, like in a mountainous region on the beach, you get the awe in there too. So we keep stacking this up, right? But this is a great route to go down with kind of practical advice for listeners as how they can take your research and apply it to their lives. So, I mean, let's go with a really basic question. How can someone identify their circadian rhythm? Because you've mentioned it's highly variable. We can change it over time. You've mentioned some issues you have with the idea of a chronotype. So would it be based on past experience? Is there a more rigorous method with sleep tracking? How would you recommend to someone they find their circadian rhythm?
Yeah, so what you're asking is how one would figure out what is their sleep-wake cycle, right?
Yeah,
because sleep-wake cycle is kind of the one obvious thing that we all relate to, and it forms the basis for many things, including interaction within the family. So I can tell you from my own experience, for example, throughout my PhD, you could call me a night owl because I used to stay awake till 2 or 3, and I would come back to my apartment and go back to work around 10 or 11. And people thought, even I thought, maybe I was night owl, I was more productive at night and all that stuff. And then after I started postdoc, slowly I realized that when I don't... So actually what happened was I was drinking too much coffee, and I didn't realize until my hands started shaking. And then I realized that I was drinking too many Diet Cokes. And then I stopped for a while, and all of a sudden I could not believe that I could not stay awake beyond 9:30 or 10 p.m.
Wow.
So...
so caffeine was keeping you up for like 5 hours a night sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, so I was caffeinated, and also I chose to work at night because, when you are in a lab with multiple instruments and you want to use those instruments, then working at night is the best option because you can use. But the point was, I was thinking for 6-7 years that, well, I'm much better working at night. But actually, when I stopped caffeine, and I became completely I would say normal, because I felt like going to sleep around 9:30 or 10. And even these days, once in a while, say Thanksgiving till New Year, I stop caffeine and I go back to that 9:30 to 10 p.m. sleep pattern. And that's one. And then the other thing is, actually in my house, we don't have any bright light, no bright LEDs in the living room or in the bedroom. And that's important because right now in many households, people actually light up their living room and houses with very bright LEDs because it keeps them alert during daytime, and they don't understand that also keeping them awake late into the night. So 20 years ago, this was not a problem because the lights were pretty dim compared to the bright LED, but now it's becoming a problem. And right now, like 3 weeks ago, I was back in India, and I realized that in India, now, because of the urgency of conserve electricity, almost all households have super bright LEDs, and it's very difficult to actually feel sleepy in the evening. So this is something that we have to pay attention. So I guess the point is, if you want to figure out what is your regular rhythm, then just stay off caffeine and then dim down your light in the evening and see what time you'll fall asleep. Or if you want to take an expensive route, then go for camping for 7 days or glamping. Actually, once I went to Masai Mara, the same thing happened. I had my teenage daughter and my wife and I, and then we had a bunch of friends. And outside Masai Mara, we were in a bush camp, and almost all of us fell asleep around 9 o'clock because nothing else to do. You cannot even get out of your tent. There are lions outside, so there's no light. And
Yeah.
my teenage daughter still comes back and says, the best sleep I had was in Masai Mara because there is no light. It's pitch dark. So,
Yeah. Great. Well, we're going to start wrapping up here,
yeah.
Satchin, and this has been so enlightening and a lot of interesting nuance, I think, things that I was unaware of coming into the conversation. But we're going to ask you kind of our signature question. We call it the flourishing question. And, you've shared a lot here. I think the simple way to frame this is that phrase I like to use, where's the juice kind of really worth the squeeze? If somebody had to take one action step to kind of better optimize or regulate, or let's say really leverage circadian alignment, what do you think they should start with?
Yeah, so I guess, every day, our day actually starts on last night when we went to bed, because that determines what time you wake up or how you feel and all that stuff. So that's why I have very simple 6 simple rules, and out of the 6, maybe we can pick 1 or 2. People can pick 1, 2, or 3, or maybe all 6. So number 1 is try to go to bed at a consistent time.
Yeah.
And stay in bed for 8 hours. I'm not asking everybody to sleep for 8 hours. Just be in bed. That's your bedtime. Even if you're checking your email before you go to bed, that's okay. But at least be in bed for 8 hours, because that's when your brain will reset, repair, and make memories. And when you don't sleep enough, then the next day, your brain doesn't work in the sense that it cannot perceive information correctly, it cannot process information correctly, it can recall memories, and it cannot take action correctly. So that's why it can reflect, it can manifest in taking bad judgment, as simple as getting into an argument or making bad choices about food, about almost everything. So that's why sleep. Be in bed for 8 hours after a consistent bedtime. Number 2 is, after waking up, wait for at least 1 or 2 hours before your first bite, because that's when your day hormones are spiking. Cortisol is pretty high exactly when we wake up. Within 45 minutes, your melatonin levels have gone down hardly by 50%, and both these hormones are pretty bad for our glucose regulation. So that's why wait for 1 or 2 hours. And if you want, that's the time, if you can go out and get some daylight, just go check your house plant or balcony plant or backyard, take the dog for a walk around that time, because you get bright daylight and that resets, synchronizes your brain clock, increases alertness. And then after waiting for 1 or 2 hours, have a consistent breakfast time, whether it's at 2 hours after waking up, 3 hours after waking up, doesn't matter, but be consistent, and then eat all your food within 8, 9, 10, or maximum 12 hours. Because if you eat more than 12 hours, then it'll get very close to bedtime. Then the 4th one is, in the evening, again, stop eating at least 3 hours before bedtime, because you need that time to digest food, and also for the body to cool down. And then the next one is to dim down your light if you can in the evening, because that helps you to build up the melatonin that you need for better night's sleep. And then during daytime, don't forget to, if you could not go in the morning to get daylight, at least during late afternoon, go for a walk outdoor, because late afternoon exercise is much better than the same exercise in the morning. Although exercise at any time is much better than no exercise. But if you want to squeeze the best, then go for late afternoon exercise. And if you can do it outdoor, then you get light and exercise. So these are the simple things. Out of all of these, I guess, since eating time has the biggest impact, if you can do what is now popular as intermittent fasting, but the correct scientific term is time-restricted eating, where you choose 8, 9, 10, or maximum 12 hours eating time, that seems to even improve sleep. So that's why this is the first point for intervention, and then everything else will fall into place.
Great. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Terrific list. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Satchin. This has been a fascinating conversation. Is there anything you want to mention in terms of where people can learn more about your work? Any new books you've got coming out? Anything you wish to mention before we wrap today?
Yeah, I have two books. The first one is this Circadian Code. Now, this has been translated to 12 or 16 different languages. And then the second one is the Circadian Diabetes Code, because most circadian rhythm disruption, even 5 days of sleep disruption, can make a healthy person pre-diabetic. So, and once diabetes starts, it brings its sinister friend. So that's why I wrote that book. Then I will try to be more active on Twitter. Satchin Panda is my Twitter handle. And then we have a website, mycircadianclock.org. We also have an app for anyone to download and use it. It's free. It's for academic purpose only. So that means we don't sell the data. We don't advertise anything. And every person who downloads and shares their data, they help. It's almost like making a donation to research by donating your data. We anonymize everything, and it's secured. So we have few 100,000 people who have already shared their data. So that's how we know how shift workers have a different lifestyle, how teenagers have a different lifestyle, when people eat. So that will be extremely helpful.
Absolutely. Well, we'll add all of those to the show notes. Thank you so much, Dr. Satchin Panda. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this episode of Flourish FM. This has been Understanding the Impact of Biological Rhythms on Flourishing with Dr. Satchin Panda.
Thanks so much for listening to Flourish FM. We hope you enjoyed the content. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast and on all major social media platforms.
And if you visit our website, flourishfmpodcast.com, you can sign up to our newsletter. We send out a weekly newsletter. First newsletter of every month, we share a long-form blog, and every newsletter, every week, we share highlights from our previous episodes. Please hit subscribe on our website.